As we gather together to celebrate the Eucharist, we observe the fourth Sunday of Easter, also known as Good Shepherd Sunday. The reason why it's been received this name is because of the gospel, that every year on the fourth Sunday of Easter, we read from chapter 10 of St. John's Gospel, and in chapter 10, Jesus revealed himself to the crowds as the Good Shepherd. When Jesus spoke those words to the people of his day, they had an understanding of what he meant in his relationship with them. For they knew that a flock needed a shepherd who was dedicated, committed, and willing to give his life for the sheep. Sheep are defenseless and dependent. They have hooves, they don't have claws. Their teeth are rather tiny. And with all the wool they have, they don't run very fast. And so sheep need a shepherd. Need a shepherd not only to protect them, to guard them, to keep them from harm, they also need a shepherd who will lead them to green pastures, who will guide them to still waters, who will be there when they are hurt, sick. And when they wander away, they need a shepherd to search for them and find them. And that's what Jesus is telling the people then. That's what he's telling us today. That he wants to be for us a good shepherd who will always defend us, protect us, and guard us, who will always be there to nurture and nourish us, who will be there to bring us healing and wholeness in our lives. And when we find ourselves wandering away, Jesus, the Good Shepherd, will always search us out and find us. And when he finds us, not to reprimand, not to punish, but to rejoice that we once again are part of the flock. In our very short section from St. John's Gospel, it's only 3 verses today, this part of the Gospel passage reflects not so much on Jesus, the Good Shepherd, but rather upon the flock, the sheep, us. Jesus says, "My sheep hear my voice, and they follow me." It sounds so easy. It sounds so simple. We just have to hear his voice and follow. But you and I know that as easy as it sounds, it's very difficult to do. You and I live in a world where we are bombarded every day, every moment of the day, with all sorts of voices and noises trying to gain our attention. On the radio, on TV, in the newspaper, in ads. Everybody and everything is trying to get our attention to follow them, to agree with them. And so you and I have to work at listening for the voice of the Lord. And that work is very, very difficult at times because the Lord doesn't shout his word. Most of the time, the Lord whispers his word in the recesses of our heart. And so in the loudness of our lives, you and I have to take time to quiet ourselves, to step back, to be attentive, to sort out all those other distractive noises and listen for the voice of Jesus. He is speaking to us every day. Some of us might disagree with that, but that's because we're not listening. But every day he speaks to us his word, his plan for that day, this day, the only time we have. And when you and I take time to listen to his word and hear his word, the second thing we need to do is follow. And again, that also is not easy to do. Because to follow Jesus means that every day, every moment of that day, you and I make a commitment to do what the Lord asks us to do. To make peace, to share forgiveness, to be of loving and kind, compassionate to others. And when we say we follow Jesus, it means people have to see those words and those actions in our daily lives. To say we follow Jesus and we just show up at Mass on the weekend is not enough. What do we do the rest of the week? Do we put the graces we receive here as we celebrate the Eucharist into practice? Do we make peace with those we disagree with? Do we reach out in care and concern for those who need our help? Do we listen to someone who wants to share their innermost thoughts? That's what it means to follow Jesus, to do what he did, to speak as he spoke, to be there for others as he was. When we do that, we will find ourselves experiencing joy because we were part of transforming a person's life. And at times we'll also find ourselves being rejected, being ignored, and we suffer. I think that's why a lot of Catholic Christians don't really live out their faith as best they can, because they fear being rejected by their family and their friends. Because when we speak the truth, we run into lots of people who don't want to hear the truth, the sacredness of life, the meaning of marriage. The gospel values call people to transformation and metanoia, and lots of people don't want to change. We saw that in our first reading from the Acts of the Apostles, when we see Paul hearing the voice of Jesus and making a commitment to follow him. Now, we first met Paul when his name was Saul. He was a very devout Jewish individual, so devout that he saw that this little community of people who followed this person named Jesus was a threat to his faith and to his tradition. And because he saw them as a threat, he took action. And his action was to persecute them, to arrest them, to put them on trial, to get rid of them. And so one day on his way to Damascus, with a letter in hand to arrest anyone and everyone who were following this person named Jesus, along the way, the Lord speaks to him in a very dramatic way. A bright light which knocks him to the ground. And he hears this voice saying, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And Saul replies, "Who are you, sir?" And the voice says, "I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting." And in that dramatic moment, as Saul listened and heard the voice of Jesus, his life was changed. His life was transformed from persecutor to proclaimer of God's word. And we see that in today's gospel, as Paul and Barnabas travel around the area proclaiming the message of Jesus. And they come to this one town where there are many Gentiles and a strong, rather Jewish community there, and they begin to preach the truth, preach the words of Jesus and his gospel values. We see that many people were delighted by what they heard. especially the Gentiles, because Paul was including them in this plan of salvation by God. But the Jewish community were not happy at all, and they began to persecute and punish and drive Paul from their town. So an example of what happens to all disciples of Jesus when they hear his word, commit themselves to follow him, and put it into action. Good things happen, but oftentimes suffering also comes our way. As we continue in our celebration of Mass this morning, as you and I observe Good Shepherd Sunday, let us remember who Jesus is for us. The Good Shepherd, the one who brings healing and wholeness, nourishment and nurturing to our lives. Let us also remember who we are. We are the sheep, his flock, who need to hear, follow, and live the gospel values.